How many of you here have seen the movie Won't You Be My Neighbor? It's a documentary about Fred Rogers, more particularly Reverend Fred Rogers of the Presbyterian Church, USA. Mr. Rogers, Mr. Rogers' neighborhood raised me and raised a lot of people in this room to know that what he said was true. Mr. Rogers said, encountering and appreciating your neighbor is a sacred activity. If you haven't seen this documentary, Won't You Be My Neighbor, this is my shameless plug. I hope you will go see it. In the midst of all that's happening in the world, you will feel better. And you might even leave wondering how people will remember you. Here's the good news. You have something to share with this world that people will look back on and appreciate. You have something to share. Do not wait to share it. The latest research from the Pew Research Center finds that United States income disparity is widening at alarming rates. And if there is truth to the economics of trickle-down or rising tides lifting all boats, it may be borne out in the numbers, but it's not borne out in the stories of the people. Small wonder we were told this week by a billionaire to ignore what we're reading and seeing. If we ignore our experience, we will never know what is true. We will never know our true selves, how God made us, whole and in God's image. Author Douglas Rushkoff writes of his recent experience with the richest of the rich after being engaged to speak to an exclusive group. Here is his story in his words. I was ushered into what I thought was the green room, but instead of being wired with a microphone or taken to a stage, I just sat there at a plain round table as my audience was brought to me. 5 super wealthy guys, yes, all men, from the upper echelon of the hedge fund world. After a bit of small talk, I realized they had no interest in the information I had prepared about the future of technology. Slowly but surely, they edged into their real topics of concern, such as, which region will be less impacted by the coming climate crisis, New Zealand or Alaska? Is Google really building Ray Kurzweil a home for his brain? And will this consciousness live through the transition, or will it die and be reborn as a whole new one? Finally, the CEO of a brokerage house explained that he had nearly completed building his own underground bunker system and asked me, how do I maintain authority over my security force after the event? The event. That was the euphemism for either an environmental collapse, social unrest, a nuclear explosion, an unstoppable virus, or a Mr. Robot hack that takes everything down. The event. The single question occupied us for the rest of the hour. They knew armed guards would be required to protect their compounds from the angry mobs, but how would they pay the guards once money was worthless? What would stop the guards from choosing their own leader? The billionaires considered using special combination locks on the food supply or making guards wear disciplinary collars of some kind in return for their survival. That's when it hit me, at least as far as these gentlemen were concerned. This was a talk about the future of technology. For all their wealth and their power, they don't believe they can affect the future. The future became less a thing we create through our present-day choices and hopes for humankind, than a predestined scenario we bet on with venture capital, but arrive at passively. This frees everyone from the moral implications of our activities. Technology development became less a story of collective flourishing than personal survival. When the hedge funders asked me the best way to maintain authority over their security forces after the event, I suggested that their best bet would be to treat those people really well right now. They should be engaging with their security staffs as if they were members of their own family. And the more they can expand this ethos of inclusivity to the rest of their business practices, supply chain management, sustainability efforts, and wealth distribution, the less chance there will be of an event taking place anyway. For all their wealth and power, they don't believe they can affect the future. Luckily, those of us without the funding to consider disowning our humanity have much better options available to us. We don't have to use technology in such antisocial ways, for number one. We can become the individual consumer and profiles that our platforms want us to be, or we can remember that the truly evolved human does not go it alone. Being human is not about individual survival or escape. Being human is a team sport. Whatever future we have, it will be together. Today's scripture lesson is the story of a collective flourishing right under the nose of oppression, under the nose of the exploited Roman colonization that had led to the renaming of the actual Sea of Galilee to the Sea of Tiberias in honor of the emperor. Well, the emperor's renaming rights have long expired. And that's what happens with earthly rulers. Powers expire. You are here at church to participate in something that will never expire. Something that will never go sour. Something enduring, something big, and something alive that will never die. And it is illustrated in the feeding of the multitude. So the mob of Jesus fans follow him everywhere, wanting to see more signs and more miracles. So Jesus punks Philip with this question: how are we going to feed all these people, Philip? And Philip answers, even with 6 months of pay, oh, there's no way. We cannot do this. This was Philip's event, right? He's having the event now. Then Andrew spies a young man with the loaves and the fishes and says, well, we could try stretching out these loaves and fishes, but I don't know how far they'll go. Such little portions for so many people. Andrew, aka Captain Obvious, tells Jesus that food is scarce. And what are our little contributions going to do to help anyway? Does anybody here feel like this these days? So much going on, so much I want to help with. If only I could do something to make it better. Friends, you have to start where you are. Start where you are and do something, no matter how small. Jesus considers Andrew and says, I think everybody ought to sit down for this. Then the writer of John's Gospel lets us know that this story is relevant to San Francisco by inserting this line: there was a great deal of grass in the place. Sorry, that's a tacky joke. Sorry. Tacky, I'm sorry. And Jesus then started a miracle, not with an inventory of what they have, not with the devil's advocate at the table. Jesus started a miracle by giving thanks. Thank you, God, for what I have. After feeding everybody, they wound up with 12 baskets of leftovers, symbolizing, I think, one for each of the tribes of Israel. In other words, plenty, not just for the super rich, but for everybody. Plenty. Of course, this is a miracle. Miracles, writes theologian Douglas John Hall, do not impress the post-Enlightenment mind. Instead, stories of miracles, he says, repel belief today. We even find ourselves joking about some once sacred things. In Jesus Christ Superstar last Palm Sunday, we all laughed at the really great joke when Herod says, "Hey Jesus, why don't you walk across my swimming pool?" A once sacred thing couldn't possibly be real, could it? The miracle of feeding the multitude is repeated in all four Gospels, reassuring us that the Lord will provide, always has, always will. Now, I have friends who like to reason this miracle into logic by saying, how could 5,000 people show up, including families with children, and nobody thought to bring something to eat? The miracle is that Jesus taught them how to share. And I agree, with every passing day, that would be a miracle. And I would settle for that interpretation if only the text said that happened. John Douglas Hall says that what is truly wonderful is not that a seeming human, Jesus, could multiply loaves and fishes to an astounding manner, but that this truly human being, Jesus, could represent by his words and by his deeds such signs of hope, such signs of healing, that needy people would follow him around and feel that their hunger was satisfied. When we explain away miracles, we miss what is truly extraordinary, the intervention of the sovereign God. Your daily grind is full of miracles. I like to start with gravity. Gravity is a miracle. If it were ever off just a little bit one morning when we woke up, we would be in a world of hurt. Gravity, that's a good place to start. Elizabeth Barrett Browning puts it this way: earth is crammed with heaven, and every common bush afire with God. But only those who see take off their shoes. Lou and I recently took a little driving vacation to Southern Oregon. We saw Crater Lake and Lassen in Northern California, all the places that are now on fire, unfortunately, are in our prayers today. It was a clear night, and we had rented a place. It was really in solitude, hanging on the side of a hill. And we were laying on the deck outside, staring at the stars. Do you ever get out of the city just to look at the stars? It is worth whatever you have to do to go look at the night sky. It was sparkling clear, and what I saw was breathtaking. And Lou, being blind, said, "Describe it," as if I could sum up in words that kind of sidereal beauty and the infinitude of the cosmos. But being a preacher, I tried. I started talking. We eventually make sense or stop, preachers. And so I started trying to describe it. I said, well, there are about a dozen stars in the foreground, and they're brighter than the other ones. And I would point with his hand where they are. Then behind those are some dimmer ones, about 20, 25 of those. And they're scattered like this. And behind those, there's like 100 or 200 more stars, and they're just spread everywhere, and they're coming up on the horizon, and they fade out, and then they show up again. And behind that, I can just almost see that there are billions and billions more, like velvet behind everything. Do you see the Big Dipper? He said, and I said, don't test me. The next day, I got an app for my phone called Night Sky, and you aim it at the stars, and it tells you where everything is. I can never get the app to work, luckily. But now when I got home, I've got the app figured out. And every day around, in the middle of the afternoon, it sends me a little message that says, you should go look at the sky tonight. Visibility will be good. And the other day it said, the International Space Station is flying overhead. And I thought, wow, there are things happening that aren't awful. There are things happening that are like ordered and like they're supposed to be. All up there. I can't see them, but they're happening. And then it said, news, there's a lake of water on Mars. Carl Sagan called this planet a pale blue dot. Something, if we regarded it from afar, we would get everything put into order, everything put in perspective, and all of our problems and all of our conflicts would seem just as silly as God sees them. In the Psalms, you've heard a psalm already today. There are songs of lament, there are songs of joy, there are songs of praise. There are also psalms of what I call help, or asking God to set things right. If you're having emotions these days that need attention, read some psalms. You'll find a kindred spirit in those psalms. The deepest, darkest human emotions are put to paper in the psalms. This is a paraphrase of Psalm 9 from Presbyterian theologian and Church of Scotland pastor John Bell. So please pray this with me.
In vain
Amen.